Let's quickly get you quick reaction from those that have just lost out at court, the AfriForum.
We've already decided such, and we are concerned that we live in a political system, in a country, in a legal system where it's quite obvious, or this ruling makes it quite obvious, that when a leader of a political party blatantly and openly romanticizes violence towards minority communities, it's condoned and it's accepted by the courts, and that's something we cannot accept. That's not a symptom or a sign of a free democratic system. That's a sign of an oppressive system. And we must be very cautious of political systems where violence towards minority communities is accepted and seen as something that's not quite as condemnable as violence incited against the majority. That's a very dangerous route. It's a slippery slope, and that's why we will file an appeal.
And when you say there are what you call the
errors. Yeah, so one thing that we were a bit concerned about in the judgment is the judge gave very strong emphasis and highlighted several times the issue of a link between chanting "Kill the boer, kill the farmer" and farmers being murdered, despite the fact that throughout my testimony, throughout the arguments given by our legal team, we have repeatedly stated that the test of whether something is hate speech does not depend on whether there is a causal link. The judge, at least from his summary, it seems to us as if he thinks that you need to prove some form of a causal link. Well, that's not what the Act says. That's not what our argument was. So it seems to us that the judge didn't really, at least in his summary, didn't give a proper evaluation of our argument. And he seems to have dismissed an argument that we didn't present to the court. So we are concerned about that, and also we don't think the ruling is consistent with what was already decided by the Constitutional Court in the Kwalani matter, which was also a hate speech case.
How do you feel about you not being a witness that this matter could rely on, and with all other of your witnesses as
Yeah. Well, that's one aspect that's not consistent with what the Constitutional Court has already decided. In the Kwalani case, for example, it was a hate speech case, particularly regarding hate speech against the gay community. And in that case, there were expert witnesses who were professors who were also gay, who spoke about their experiences as being gay and so forth. And it was accepted, as it should be. And now, when it's an Afrikaner testifying about his experience as his experience in a community where his friends and people in his community have been murdered, then suddenly it's dismissed and it's not acceptable. So we are concerned about double standards. And I think what this also says to us, again, is that we will appeal. We will file an appeal. But other than that, it's very clear to us that if we want to have a future as a minority community in this country, we have to look after ourselves. And the answer is, if the legal system does not protect our community, we'll have to put our energy and our focus on strengthening our community safety structure so that we are physically able to defend ourselves when we're attacked, if the courts are not prepared to defend us.
So the judge saying that there's really no link here when it comes to the singing of the song. Previously there was an explanation being done that when Peter Mokaba sang the song, there was a sign of farm murders. But he's saying that the evidence you have brought on doesn't show that. Do you accept that?
Well, yeah, so I testified about research that we've done and that I've done personally with our team, of course, about a spike in farm murders after high-profile cases of hate speech. And I listed several examples. The one we put the biggest emphasis on was the case of Peter Mokaba, because it was this exact same song. And the fact that after he started chanting the song, which he popularized again, I mean, we know it's an old song coming from the struggle years, and I testified to that effect as well, but he then popularized it again in the early 90s, and then there was a sudden spike in farm murders and farm attacks after he started singing this song. So I testified about that to emphasize how serious we should take an issue like this. But that does not mean that our testimony is that we're trying to prove a link between the two, because it's not necessary to prove a link. If we did prove a link, which I think we did, it's not necessary for the question of whether it's hate speech or not. And I think if that is, of course we'll read the full judgment, but if the conclusion of the judge is this is not hate speech because they didn't prove a link, then that's wrong. That's not what the Act says.
And what do you say about the judge saying that, well, he said that this is not hate speech, it crime also offensive? Do you find it as offensive?
Yeah, well, it's obviously offensive, and in a sense I agree with the judge, and we agree with the judge, that we must be very cautious not to accept offensive speech as hate speech. Offensive speech is a reality, it's unfortunate, but it's part of democracy, and in a free system, people will say things that offend each other. That does not mean that it's hate speech. The difference between offensive speech, when the question is whether does offensive speech become hate speech, and the answer is it's an easy answer. The answer is when it targets a particular community based on their identity, such as the boer community or the farming community or white people or something to that effect. It targets a group of people based on their identity, and then it incites violence, or it creates a situation where harm is inflicted upon that community. Then it becomes hate speech. And now if a political leader goes onto a political platform and says all white people are criminals, they have to be treated as such. If he testifies in court, I might one day call on my supporters to slaughter white people, and he chants kill the boer, kill the farmer, and then the judge says, no, that's not hate speech, it's only offensive. If that's not hate speech, what is hate speech? There's nothing left on the spectrum that can be hate speech if this isn't hate speech.